All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out tonight, especially on this auspicious evening. I wasn't sure if I'd have 3 or 4 people or if I'd have a large crowd tonight. This is, of course, if you're not familiar with it in the internet viewing audience, tonight is International Sino-Judaic Friendship Day. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, right. Sino, like Chinese, right? You know. This joke comes to us from Mr. Chaim Singer of Passaic, New Jersey, who says it's an ultimate dad joke. His father, Dr. Carl Singer, often tells this joke. So here's how the joke goes. There's this company that's looking for a new office manager, and they're advertising, and they're having difficulty getting someone to take the job. And so they're waiting and waiting for someone to show up, and finally the doorbell rings, and they open the door, and in walks a large boxer, a dog. Large dog. And they look at the dog, and the dog looks at them, and they don't know what to say, so the dog he lifts up his paw, and he puts his hand on the desk. And they look at the desk, and right there is the job ad. And they say to the dog, "Are you here to apply for a job?" And the dog barks once. And they don't know what to do, so they say, well, they start talking to each other, what about equal opportunity, affirmative action, what do we do? A dog applies for this job. So they say to the dog, well, this job has very high requirements. You have to have quite a bit of skills. For example, you have to know how to take dictation. The dog immediately pulls out a pair of reading glasses and a pen, and he's got his pad ready to go. And they say, well, this dog requires extensive computer skills. You have to be able to type 70 words a minute. Jumps up to the terminal, bangs out, 1,000 words in just a couple of minutes. Amazing. And they say, well, this job requires that the successful candidate be bilingual. And the dog says, meow. That's the dad joke, right?
That's a cute joke.
Yeah, thank you. I thought so too. Once again, Dr. Carl Singer from Passaic, New Jersey. Okay. No, that's his dad's joke. It's his dad's joke, right? Okay. Anyways, so tonight's topic is actually quite fascinating. I really had a tremendous time doing the research for this. It's not a topic I knew much about at all until just really about a week ago, and it's a little bit outside my area of expertise. It's more about literature and poetry and so on, but I found it just absolutely fascinating. I hope that you will enjoy it as well. So today we're going to talk, however, about a woman who is hardly known even among historians. I just came across her because I'm trolling through some of the websites on the history of Jewish women, and there are all these undiscovered characters who really get very little treatment in the historical literature. Her name is Qasmunah, and we only have 2.5 poems attributed to her, about 10 lines worth of text attributed to her, and it really is tremendously revelatory about the nature of gender and religion, particularly in the medieval Iberian climate. So let's have a look at her life and try to understand what we can tease out of the tiny amounts of information we have about the nature of Jewish life in the Middle Ages, especially as it applies to women. So the main source of our information for this woman named Qasmunah, by the way, the name is rather interesting. Scholars opine that it might be related to the word kesem, which is a Hebrew root that transliterates into its Arabic cognate to mean a that reminds me, by the way, I don't know if you all watch my videos online, but I put out others that I don't give here. I gave out one on how to spell the word Hanukkah. And I cannot believe the amount of noise and comments that people have contributed to it. One person wrote, like I happen to say that the reason why we spell it with a CH is because the English language does not have a symbol for the guttural pronunciation of ch. Right? And so a whole bunch of linguists are just lurking around the web waiting to jump on me. One of them said, oh my gosh, it is not a guttural, it is a voiceless fricative. Right? And that was a great term. And then someone else came on with, no, it's a... Well, anyways, so back to where we were. Kesem is related to the word for sorcery. And so her name might mean like little witch but in a diminutive sense, meaning like you name your child after, she's like enchanting, an enchantress, right? That would be a nice way of saying little witch. Other scholars say no, it's related to a purely Arabic root, which means shining or beautiful, which is perhaps a more traditional name. But at any rate, it clearly is an Arabic name. Women historically have often been given non-Hebraic names, primarily because they were not required to be called up to the Torah. When men are called up to the Torah, it's considered much more common for them to be called up by a traditional Hebrew name, Avram, Yaakov, Yitzchak, whatever it is. But since women did not have that privilege for the vast majority of Jewish history, they were often given popular non-Jewish names, right up really until Fiddler on the Roof, with names like Zeitel and Sprinza and Badana, Masha, which is of course Maria. These are all very traditional non-Jewish names. Well, originally Maria was a very Jewish name, but then they kind of got spoiled. Okay, anyways, the story goes that the source that we have for Qasmunah and her life is from a early 16th century Arabic Muslim dictionary of female poets. So this Muslim writer collected the poetry written by women over several centuries, and he has an entry on this woman named Qasmunah al-Yahuda, Qasmunah the Jewess. We don't have a record of her in Jewish sources whatsoever. We get her only through this Muslim medium. And he says a very beautiful story at the very beginning, that Qasmunah's father was a very educated man. We'll have some opinions as to who he might have been. And he would teach her this particular Arabic poetic style of rhyming, not exactly rhyming couplets, but he would start a poem from her, and then she would have to finish it. Anyway, so the first quotation that we have, her father said to her, "I have a friend whose woman has repaid good with evil, considering lawful that which is forbidden to her." It's kind of a complicated sentence. He says to this young daughter, I have a friend whose woman has repaid good with evil, done something bad to her husband, boyfriend, whatever, considering that lawful that which is forbidden to her. And she's taken advantage of that relationship. Qasmunah then replied, just like the sun from which the moon derives its light, always, yet afterward eclipses the body of the sun. Beautiful astronomical metaphor that fits with the first idea of the poem. And as the Arabic author of the collection of poems writes, her father embraced her and said, my daughter, by the 10 Commandments, right, a typical Jewish thing to say, you are a greater poet than I. So this is our first kind of introduction to Qasmunah. You have this beautiful idea of her relationship with her father, a very literary relationship, and one in which she demonstrates wit and sensitivity, and to a certain degree asserts her kind of unique femininity in an unusual way, which we will explore in the course of this lecture. So that's our first introduction to Qasmunah. Any questions so far? Okay, so since we are 11 minutes, I actually had a different talking dog joke to start, and I would like to tell that joke because it was in my brain when I started. So if you don't mind, Joseph, you're still awake, right? So I can tell you this joke? So the joke goes like this. This is a joke I was going to start with. It's Erev Yom Kippur, and the synagogue is full of Jews, and they're all thinking about atonement and the year to come, and they're waiting and waiting for the chazan to show up, the cantor to show up. And he's not coming, and finally someone bursts in and says, the chazan, he took another job, he's over in Peoria right now, he's going to lead the services over there, we don't have a chazan. Everyone's saying, oh my gosh, it's almost Yom Kippur, we have a few minutes, how are we going to possibly daven the Yom Kippur Kol Nidre service? And they're asking around, does anyone know how to daven, does anyone know how to do this? They could. Finally one guy steps forward, sheepishly goes up to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I know a chazan that knows Kol Nidre. And he says, okay, bring him here. He says, well, you know, it's not so easy. You see, he's a dog. And the rabbi says, a dog? He says, yeah, he's a dog, but he does a beautiful Yom Kippur, really. It's a Kol Nidre. The rabbi says, well, I don't know what to do. Just bring him in here. Bring the dog in. It's a boxer with a white, working as a receptionist, by the way, in a firm that just got the job. And the congregation is skeptical. What does it mean? So they they put a tallis on him anyways. He goes up to the Aron and he puts his front two paws on the Aron, and then he kind of gathers himself, sort of clears his throat, he purses his lips, and then he begins Kol Nidre, and the room is silent. Everyone is overwhelmed with the emotion and the sensitivity and the technical precision with which he enunciates all of the prayers, and people by the end of the service are weeping. They are overwhelmed. What a tremendous Kol Nidre. They never heard such a thing. So the rabbi says, can he do Shachris? Says, sure, Shachris, Musaf, the whole thing. Goes through everything, goes through Ne'ilah, finishes the davening. The congregation is transformed. They've all done tshuva. They're going to be tremendously good Jews for the coming year. Then a committee of the board members come up and they say to the owner of the dog, listen, we love this Yom Kippur service, and we'd like to offer your dog a full-time position as chazan. And the guy says, I'm sorry, that's not going to be possible. And they say, well, why not? He says, well, he really has his heart set on medical school. So that one's more Jewish, but I think I like Dr. Singer's joke. But anyways, okay, so back to Qasmunah. Here we go. Now, the style of her poetry is a very highly technical Arabic style called, I'll try this once, Muwashashaha. My Arabic is terrible. It's just a little bit worse than my Urdu and my Swahili. But this is considered, as I've read in the literature, to be an extremely complicated type of poetic style that cognoscenti really enjoy, with the detailed, rhyme and meter and so on. And we can only assume that it is as great as the poets and the scholars say. Now, the way that this poetess is described is, as I said, Qasmunah the Jewess, and she is named as Bint Ismail. Sorry, it's Bint Ismail ibn Magdala. I might have a typo in this here. The daughter of Ismail of Baghdad. And one particular scholar named Bellamy argues that, in fact, when you look more closely at the literary evidence, it's quite possible that Bagdala was actually a misprint, and it was none other than Shmuel Hanagid, which is Samuel ibn Nagrela. An absolutely fascinating proposition, because Shmuel Hanagid, that's his Hebrew name as opposed to the Arabic, was one of the most famous Jews of the Spanish Golden Age. A tremendously towering figure of phenomenal importance, and if this was in fact his daughter, it opens up a whole new venue into what we know about the world of Iberian Jewry and about Jewish women in the Spanish lands. As we shall see, there's a lot of controversy over that particular assertion. It's far from clear that this is in fact her father, but it certainly does place her life within a royal context, a long rabbinic context, and in fact a royal context. So before we go into it, let's just talk a little bit about why we know so little about her. The unfortunate reality is that women basically drop off the radar screen for almost all of Jewish history. We have some exceptional women who stand out in the biblical period. Of course, the foremothers, women like Tzipporah, Moses' wife, and so on, with very few exceptions, like let's say Bruria. With very few exceptions, they always tend to be living in the shadow of a male. Either their husband, their father, sometimes their sons, but they rarely stand out on their own. And the historiography, the literature that we have, basically ignores women's history. And there are a lot of reasons for this. It's hard to believe that Jewish women were not so exceptional, since we know how exceptional they are even today. And I said that even when my wife left the room. She actually walked out of the room for a second there. But the fact is, Jewish women are so phenomenally powerful in the structure of Jewish life, particularly traditionally observant Jewish life. It's hard to imagine that their influence and leadership was not felt more dramatically throughout the ages. Why do we have such a small record of their activity? Part of this is because of the tropism of historiography, meaning the way that historiography works. Most of Western Jewish historiography, which follows non-Jewish historiography, tends to focus on leaders who stand out in the public eye. Judaism as a culture has always emphasized this idea of kol kvuda bas melech pnima. All the glory of the princess is within. This concept called tzniut, or hiddenness, which is considered a very positive value in Judaism, but does not translate very well into Western non-Jewish culture. There is this idea that in Judaism, the more valuable a thing it is, the more it should be withheld, the more that it should be closed off, hidden, modest. Like the classic example the rabbis often bring is the Torah scroll, which is not left out on display, open for everyone. It's closed up inside a mantle, behind a curtain, with a chain, inside a box, and it's only brought out at very special occasions of communal importance in which everyone has to show the correct level of deference to it. So Judaism as a culture has valued that level of selflessness, of voluntarism on the part of women, which often does not make it to the top of the charts when it comes to recording the historical events of the Jewish people. There's also some very strong patriarchal elements to Jewish culture, which tends to devalue women's activities in general and consider them second class. So one can really approach this with an apologetic, emphasizing the value of tzniut, the value of hiddenness. One can also point to the patriarchal structures which tend to, suppress women's activity. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we have very few women who have the kind of historical data describing their lives as we do for men. Looking specifically at the Iberian Peninsula at this period, women do figure in poetry. We'll look at a few female poets, but looking at women in poetry, they tend to occupy certain very classical roles or tropes, if you will. There's the trope of the coquette, the woman who is a tease, the woman who is leading men on, very libidinous and so on. And then there is the trope of the shrew, the overly talkative wife, the nagging wife, those kinds of things. And so you see those very prominently in the body of Arabic literature that appears from the Spanish Middle Ages. And as we shall see, actually, Qasmunah's poems, even though we only have 2.5 of them, we just saw the first half, they really do stand out as being quite different. So part of the reason for this as well, according to Goitein, who was one of the greatest scholars of this period, is that women were largely excluded from the discourse, not only because of cultural norms, but because of linguistic norms. Judaism as a culture basically values Hebrew, with very few exceptions, considering perhaps Maimonides writing in Judeo-Arabic, or Samson Raphael Hirsch writing in German in the 19th century. Almost everything that's written in non-Jewish languages, non-Hebrew, tends to disappear. The Talmud may be another very big exception to that rule, written basically in Aramaic. But if you don't write in Hebrew, you're not writing in the lingua franca of the Jewish people. And you may find that Judeo-Persian or Yiddish or Ladino is really popular with a large population at a given point in time, but after a couple of hundred years, and thinking about the long arc of Jewish history, it will disappear, unless it gets into a Hebrew translation, which is exactly what happened with Maimonides, for example. Nobody studies Maimonides in the original Judeo-Arabic nowadays, only like really sophisticated scholars. Everyone else studies translations of Maimonides, because that's the language that we use forever. So women were largely excluded from formal education in Hebrew, particularly beyond, let's say, primary level, to be able to read the Siddur, for example, maybe Chumash. After that, they weren't given advanced rabbinic training. And so, therefore, their fluency in Hebrew was statistically quite a bit less than men. They didn't leave behind that kind of record, and they disappeared. But luckily, we have women like Carol Shapiro, who you may remember her from the lecture on Babatha. I was truly preparing for this lecture. I was kind of rushed. I was in New York a little while ago, and I saw Carol at the Touro College Library, and I said, listen, I got to give a lecture next week. I know a little bit about this person, but I really don't know much. I just wrote down the word Qasmunah on a piece of paper, a little slip of paper. I said, could you please get me some information? And she sent me like 20 articles. Amazing. So we have women like Ms. Shapiro, who is really helping us out today. Okay, now what's so special about Spanish Jewry? There is this golden age of Spanish Jewry, which scholars differ about the exact chronological parameters, but let's say basically from the 9th century to the 13th century, you have this tremendous effervescence, an explosion really, of Jewish culture in Spain. This is what creates Sepharad. This is what creates a cultural movement that persists 1,000 years later. There are people who call themselves Sephardic even after they've been exiled for 500 years. It's primarily because of the activity that occurred in the Golden Age. It was the principal sociological reason for this tremendous explosion of Jewish activity, which is, by the way, kind of like the explosion of Jewish activity and creativity at the turn of the 20th century in Europe. When you looked at how does that joke go? When you look at the great minds of the turn of the 20th century who changed our nature, our understanding of society, like for example, take the 4 top minds, right? You have Freud, Sigmund Freud, who changed the way we think about the unconscious, changed the way we think about ourselves. You have Albert Einstein, changed the way we think about reality, time, space, all that. Karl Marx changed the way we think about politics, distribution of wealth, and then you have, of course, Charles Darwin, who changed the way we think about the very origin of our human species. And as the joke goes, 3 of them are Jewish and 1 of them was wrong. I can't get away with these things, but I have tenure, so I can say things like that. Okay, so what was special about Spanish Jewry? It was, first and foremost, a triangular culture, which is something that Jews did not experience for the vast majority of their history. What do I mean by that? With the exception of the period when the Jews lived in their land, in the biblical period, Jews are always a minority in every other land. And they're almost always a minority in a binary relationship, meaning there is a massive population of, let's say, Christians, and then there's a Jewish minority. And there's a tiny little minority of like maybe non-sectarian Christians, things like that, but basically it's one big population and the Jews. Or in Muslim lands, one big population of Muslims and the Jews. The Jews constitute a single minority, and they don't have the plurality of the population to be able to assert themselves effectively in that environment. The Jews are always negotiating with a state power that's far larger than they are. And so Jewish culture, for most of these centuries we're talking about, tended to develop in an insular fashion, inward looking, developing mystical thought and internal Jewish ideas and so on. Spain, however, was quite different, because Spain is a more or less 3-way split of 3 distinct populations: the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews. And of course, for much of the, really about 600 years of history, they were contesting with each other for control of the peninsula. And as a result, because the Jews were not the only minority, and they could play themselves culturally and politically and even militarily against 2 other populations, they found they had a unique power base from which to express themselves in all of these various endeavors of human activity. And this is why in Spain, for example, you have tremendous Jewish statesmen. You have Jews who are generals of armies, who, as Jews, completely observant Jews, who are nevertheless leading armies. That hardly happens anywhere. The only place where you could see things like that is, let's say, in communist Russia with Leon Trotsky, and he's not exactly an observant Jew who ends up leading an army, but here you have traditionalist Jews very much at home in the Jewish community and also taking massive leadership positions in the culture as a whole. You have Jews who are very, very comfortable in the outside culture and in Hebrew culture simultaneously. You might think perhaps in America, where there's something like that here, it's very different because we have, of course, democracy, which changes everything, but we also have this idea of, although this is largely a Christian country, we have very large minorities of non-Christians and of multiple types of Christians as well. So Jews have a unique amount of power in this country as well. But I'm going to go past that. You have the real Joseph model of leadership in Spain, just as we have in biblical Egypt, where the Jews can come in, and because of the conflict between Muslims and Christians, they can occupy a role that allows them to exercise leadership, typically in a viceroy fashion, that is unprecedented for most of Jewish history. So that's really when you have this flowering of Jewish culture. The most important of all of them is the man who is thought to possibly be Qasmunah's father, the famous Shmuel HaNagid, who lived from 993 to 1055. There's a lot of beautiful stories about his origins and his rise to power. Basically that he was a small merchant, a spice merchant, who had tremendous literary prowess, and it was noticed by a serving girl for the king, and he was eventually promoted to become none other than the viceroy and the leader of the armies of Granada. It's a really fascinating story. I gave a lecture on it a couple years ago if you look it up on the web. But what's interesting about him in our context, we know that he had 3 sons and an unnamed daughter. So it's not impossible that the daughter was Qasmunah. But he's also a tremendous poet, leaving behind nearly 2,000 poems to this day. So again, it reinforces the idea that he would have taught Qasmunah how to be a poetess. And he's also a rabbinic scholar, writing an introduction to the Talmud that is still published in Talmudic tractates today, called Hamavo, the Introduction, which is a masterful piece of research describing how the Talmud works as a document. If this is really Qasmunah's father, then we understand so much more about where she could have gotten these unusual talents and what it meant about Jewish leadership in a literary as well as political thing. Anyways, let's go to her poems themselves. Okay, there's only 3 of them, 2.5, so I should certainly read them to you. We know that she lived in Granada, either the 11th or the 12th century. That's again from this Arabic author who gives us this anthology. Her poems are written in Arabic. They're not written in Hebrew. The story that the brief descriptions in this Arabic anthology say that her poetry was so beautiful that it especially motivated her father to find a husband for her. That will actually be a fact of tremendous significance in trying to identify Qasmunah, whether or not he succeeded or whether or not he even tried, as we shall see. It appears that she never married. She may have died young. But let's look at the poems now and you'll get a sense for yourself. So here is the little introduction by the Al-Siyuti, who was the anthologist, writes, she looked in the mirror one day, right, Qasmunah. She looked in the mirror one day, seeing that she was beautiful and had reached the time of marriage, but that she was not getting married. She said, and here is her poem, I'll read it out loud, "A garden whose harvest time has come. No harvester can be seen to extend a hand to you. Alas, youth passes and is wasted." If she said, "and is wasted," then you know for sure she's Jewish. "While one remains, I will not name him, who is alone." Now, what's troublesome about this poem, especially the last part? Someone else, right? What's going on? Who is this? I will not name him. So I found out in doing my research that apparently in Iberian Arabic poetry, it was very common for women to refer to themselves in the 3rd person singular masculine. So when you read it with this weird convention you would never think of unless you read this strange article on Qasmunah, that I will not name myself who is alone. Right? Like, so here she is, she's describing herself like, you know, a garden in flower, ready to be harvested, ready to like start a married life, and yet where's the guy, where's my bashert? He's not here, I am alone. So you can see a kind of a melancholy there, a very beautiful kind of metaphor of the garden that's waiting for the gardener, so to speak. It's a very pretty poem. I'll show you another translation. This is a translation by a scholar named Nichols. Here's a translation by a woman named Gallego. I actually like this one better. "I see a garden with ripe fruit, yet the gardener, it seems, will not stretch out his hands to it. How pitiful! Youth fleets by and is lost, and something I will not name remains lonely." So Gallego managed to kind of fudge the third-person masculine part, but again, it's expressing the desire to do what, you know, a typical Yiddish Mädel wants when she's in that stage of life. She wants to find her bashert. She wants to, you know, like American girls have 1.1 children, which is basically like a child and a poodle. That's American. That was not very funny, but thank you for laughing anyways. But the idea here is that, right? So this is a sense of her. Let me show you the other poem that we have. So far we're 2/3 through her opus. This one, according to Al-Sayudi, is something that she thought of when she happened to see a deer in the woods. She saw a deer, and it inspired her to write this poem. "O dear, you who graze constantly in the meadows, I resemble you in wildness and in blackness of the eye. Both of us are alone, without a friend, and we heap blame always on the decree of fate." Another interesting, thought-provoking poem. Let's look at it for a second. Obviously, the deer who's out in the meadows, she says that she resembles the deer both in wildness, like being untamed, undomesticated, not being attached to a mate, and in blackness of the eye. What could that blackness of the eye possibly mean?
Surroundings.
It's, I'm sorry?
Surroundings.
The surroundings, interesting. This is crying. Very. This is something that's so cool. Oh, Rafaela, go ahead.
She's from Spain, so she has like doe black eyes. Like could just be a
Oh, that's pretty good. She's quite bright, isn't she? Yes, absolutely. This is something. This is why, for all of you watching on the internet, this is why you really have to learn foreign languages, because when you know in English we have certain words to say things that don't exist in other languages, but there are concepts that we don't even know exist because we have not found a word for them. So I had to figure this out. There's this word in Arabic called khawar. Khawar is considered a very beautiful characteristic which refers to the contrast between the dark iris and the white of the eye. Like when we only say in English, oh, she has beautiful eyes. But we can't say much more than that. But they have a unique word, khawar, and again, you're thinking about Spanish Jewish women with dark eyes, presumably. The contrast between the dark iris and the white, the clear white eye, the outside of it, that's considered very beautiful. So she used the word khawar here to say, like the deer, which has a very black iris and a white eye. So I am like you in this beautiful way. I found this fascinating. This is worth the whole lecture for me. Everybody can go home now. The second part here, this is Gallego's translation, the other scholar. "O gazelle which always grazes in a garden, I am comparable to you in loneliness and despair. We are both alone, without companion, but let us wait patiently for the decision of the Almighty Providence." So all of a sudden, this translation you can see is quite different. First of all, she skips over that whole khawar thing, which I think is so beautiful. I would keep that, but I'm not a translator. And look at the ending here. "Let us wait patiently for the decision of Almighty Providence." Compare that to the other translation. "We heap blame always on the decree of fate." Right? I mean, is it... Go ahead.
These are not translations, they're interpretations.
So there is a famous commentary, I believe it's by the Raivad, who says in Hebrew, "Show me a translator and I will show you a liar." Translations are always going to be, I mean, like the word here, I'm guessing, I don't know Arabic, but he blame can be the same as assign responsibility. So does assign responsibility mean he blame, or does it mean wait patiently for the decision? I don't know. Still, because unfortunately I don't know Arabic, I'm relying on the scholarly translations that exist. These are two that I found. We nevertheless get a couple of things that are common. First of all, she has some belief in either Almighty Providence or in fate, right? Like it's something that happens in the stars or with Hashem, something like that. And we also see that kind of melancholy sadness coming through as well. She's waiting, you know, where's my bashert? And there's my bashert with a question at the back.
No, it's just if you don't know Arabic, you should just get the get the person or get fricative.
Oh, I should get the guy who wants the voiceless fricative. And we need that guy over here to tell us exactly what this means. Let me show you where I think we really see her personality emerge when you compare her to, as Gallego did, to typical poetry of Arabic women of the period. And we see some interesting. Hang on a sec, I'll just show you these poems and I'll come back to you. So here we go. So James Manfred Nichols, who actually provided some of the translation, he says that there is this whole genre of women's poetry in Arabic, because then again, that was the vernacular. They were speaking Arabic. It was not so difficult for them to write Arabic, unlike Hebrew. And there's a lot of essentially love poems. By the way, Shmuel HaNagid also wrote a tremendous amount of love poetry. Some of it is really quite heated, really erotic poetry. You can visit that lecture, you'll see I quote a couple of them there, and the ones that I didn't even include on the internet are even worse. But really, you know, very hot poems. And her poetry, though, is characterized, as he put it, by its delicacy and its melancholy. Lots of metaphors, not too graphic, and again evokes that kind of sadness, that tristesse, to use the French word, rather than a you know, some kind of more graphic. Also, the very common genre, which we find strange reading about in the 21st century, but the Iberian poets had a whole genre called boast poetry, in which actually it's not so weird. It's like rap is like that, you know. Do you ever listen to rap music, where it's all about, you know, I'm so tough and I did this and I got that, I got into jail and I got out. So it's all like, you know, I know Rafi's laughing, but that's so they had that kind of genre of boast poetry. I beat that enemy of mine and he was so embarrassed and stuff like that. And Jews wrote that poetry too. Jews loved that stuff. So it doesn't have the kind of narcissism that you see in a lot of the genres poetry, and it does not have that coquettishness. She's not like, you know, flaunting her youthful beauty and the effects it has on her male admirers. Check out these examples. So here's a poetess, a female poet named Walada, who wrote, "Worthy am I, by God, of the highest, and proudly I walk with head aloft. My cheek I give to my lover, and to those who wish them I yield my kisses." Right? So there's like this very strong, very graphic, very sexual kind of. You don't see that in the few poems we have of Qasmunah, who's comparing herself to a deer, a loan, a garden, things like that. I mean, they're metaphors for relationships and for sexuality and for love, but they're very much more tznius. Another example, Najshun from the 12th century. "I paid a poem with another. Tell me, by my soul, who is the better poet? If woman be my nature, my man is my poetry." Right? If woman be my nature, man is my poetry. And the Arabs as a culture, I mean, going all the way from Spain to Malaysia, worshipped Arabic as the ultimate language. Just like Jews with Hebrew, Arabic, even if your native language is, I don't know, Urdu, or, well, actually Swahili is a good example. Your native language is East African dialects, you're going to try to imitate Arabic, and that turns into Swahili. I'm not sure if that's even close to true, but it's time for the talking dog joke, okay? It's the last talking dog joke. Do you want to do your question first?
Let's hear your joke.
Talking dog joke. Okay, 3 talking dog jokes. Joseph, you're still awake. You're really waiting for this. So it goes like this. There's an ad in the paper, dog for sale, $50. So a guy wants a dog, so he goes and he knocks, finds the classified ad, he goes to the door, knocks on the door. Dog answers the door. Boxer with a white patch in his eye. Dog says, "Can I help you?" And he says, "What?" And he says, "Can I help you? Are you here about the ad for the talking dog?" And the guy says, "I can't believe it. You talk. How do you talk?" He says, "Yeah, I know. It's a long story, but basically, before the fall of the Soviet Union, the CIA had a secret project where they genetically modified dogs and gave us special training, and the plan was to paratroop us in behind the Iron Curtain, befriend high Soviet leaders, and then once we learned state secrets, we would run away and get across the border undetected, report to our handlers, and we would be debriefed on everything. And then what happened was, Reagan and Gorbachev and Glasnost, and it all fell apart, and I was out of a job. And the guy says, that's amazing. Where's your master? I want to buy you. He says, he's in the back room. So he goes into the back room, he sees the master, and he says, I want to buy your dog. And the guy says, oh, great. Thank you. And he says, okay, great, I have $50. He says, $50? No, let's just take him. You don't have to pay him for it. Don't have to pay you for anything. What are you talking about? He's an amazing dog. Why do you want to get rid of him? And he says, well, for one thing, he's a tremendous liar. Did he tell you that story about the CIA? Okay, let's go on. So, okay, question, I'm sorry.
Other than the last 50 years or so, can you think of any Jewish women who have had any influence in the world, in the arts, in...
Are you kidding? We only have 15 minutes left, and I don't,
in politics.
Gloria Steinem jumps ahead, Betty Friedan.
Other than the last 50 years.
Other than the last 50 years. Well, there are some very significant women. If you go back just in the headers of the lectures that I've given, there's a lot of early 20th century leaders. There's women like the founders of Hadassah, Henrietta Zold. There's the poetess who wrote the Colossus, Emma Goldman. There, give me your tired. There's of course the great Rosa Luxemburg, phenomenal socialist leader, very radical socialist leader. It's much easier to find people in the 19th century onward because of the impact of feminism. So if you take me back to the 17th century, then we'd have a hard time. Then we would only dig up maybe a dozen before we were really having a hard time. But 19th century, definitely a tremendous amount of Jewish female leaders.
When I went to Cheder after school, there was not one girl in my class. I don't know what it is today, except my kids belonged to a Reform temple. It was a mixture.
Well,
I don't know what's happening in the Orthodox.
I will recommend one book to you, and then I'll take us back because I'm worried my jokes took us too much time. There's a brilliant book out there called A Breath of Life, Feminism in the American Jewish Community by Sylvia Barrett Fishman, who's one of the greatest scholars of American feminism. And she has written really quite persuasively about the impact of education on Jewish women in the last 100 years. Since, for example, Sarah Schinnerer, who founded the Beis Yaakov movement of schools for women. And she says that, most Jewish girls leaving a 12th grade Orthodox education, meaning they're 17, 18 years old, they have superior knowledge to most rabbis 50 years ago. And that's just typical graduates. There are two of them in this room right now who have, skills in Hebrew translation, tremendous amount of textual knowledge, tremendous amount of contextual historical knowledge, ritual knowledge that's literary, that they can write about and they can speak about and they can teach about. So we're living in very revolutionary times in which we have fundamentally altered the tectonic plates upon which our society rests by giving women that level of education. And now we're really in trouble. Okay, let's go weiter. Okay, now, the connection to Shmuel ibn Nagrela is problematic. The last argument for it, besides that possible misspelling of the name, is that Shmuel HaNagid lost a daughter, and he composed a poem as a eulogy. But it's somewhat problematic poem. According to what we know about his life, because he was, again, a very famous Jew of the period, his daughter died of during a smallpox epidemic in 1044. And Shmuel HaNagid wrote a poem to his favorite son, Yehoseph, to whom he dedicated, maybe 500 of his poems or 300 of his poems, consoling him, his eldest son, on the death of his younger sister. It was not actually a eulogy for the sister. It was a poem consoling his son at the loss of his sister. And that's a little weird. Shmuel HaNagid, based on his poetic record, was not exactly the kind of person you would expect to give his daughter an advanced education. For example, in one of his poems, he writes, "My son," and this is hard to believe, but you know, part of this is within the genre. He says, "My son, beat your wife every day, lest you become a wife to your wife." So that's not exactly dripping with 20th century feminist ideology. That's kind of a nasty statement. And when you put together these two little bits, that he writes a poem to his son, consoling him on the loss of his sister, and he has these other poems that are definitely, decidedly not proto-feminist, it doesn't exactly fit the mold that we saw at the beginning of the father who's, you know, playfully teaching his daughter how to write poetry. He's kind of like he's almost ignoring her. So you add that to a lot of the circumstantial evidence, the misspelling of the name, the problem with the dates, because the 15th century author believed that she lived a little bit later. It's not as plausible that she actually was Ibn Nagralla's daughter. We also have a problem over whether or not he got her a husband. As you recall, that was, you know, the primary concern of her poems. The daughter of Shmuel Hanagid died apparently too young to marry, whereas the Qasmunah described in the Arabic anthology got a husband because she was such a great poetess. So to try and connect these two together, to say, oh, here's a moderately famous Jewish poet, and here's a famous Jewish political leader, they must be related, it's a bit of a historical stretch, and although it's appealing, it may not be possible to make that. So when we look at the legacy of this woman, and again, we spent the last 50 minutes really talking about 12 lines of poetry. That's all we know about her, and kind of little tidbits that were written 500 years after she died may not at all be true. It's not possible to say without doubt that she was the daughter of Shmuel Hanagid. Bellamy wrote an article saying yes, she was. Gallego, we've seen her translation, say absolutely no. Another scholar, Garula, says maybe a descendant, because perhaps, you know, the wealth and the power of that family might have carried on. But ultimately, if we can abandon that whole discussion, my question is, does it really matter? Here we have a tremendous literary treasure, a moment of the expression of a Jewish woman living sometime in the 11th century. She tells us what's important to her. She shows us how her approach to life is distinctive from other Arabic poets, or women, I should say, Muslim women of the period. And all these things together just give us a tiny glimpse into the reality of life for women in the Iberian Peninsula in the Golden Age. So with that, I'm going to conclude. I want to thank you all for your endurance and your attention, and I look forward to seeing you next week when we talk about the Rashba. Now, thunderous applause, please, so that I don't have to add it to the track. Thank you very much. Okay.